Good evening, everyone. I'm Genevieve Marsh, and I'm here on behalf of the Alliance for Environmental Leadership tonight to discuss with you the Sunset Industrial Area and break apart all of the components that are part of this proposed development to give you a sense of the overall picture and the way that the different components interact. The Alliance for Environmental Leadership has hired me to do this site analysis and evaluate the proposed plan's effect on quality of life, environment, and our region's future. I am an urban analyst and architectural designer in Auburn, and this is one of the things that I do. I help social mission-driven organizations see the built environment more clearly. So the Sunset Industrial Area has been slated for development since the 70s, and as a result, there's a lot that has contributed to and influenced the current plan. So my intent is to organize this giant spaghetti bowl for you to give you a clear picture of the site through examining 3 different elements. The natural story includes the cycle of life and current conservation. The built story is the current conditions where we're going to get to know the neighbors and the players, as well as the agricultural and industry use and hazards. And then we're going to look at the proposed story, the Sunset Industrial Area and Plaza Ranch plans, and break down their components, and then look at the site all together as a whole. So there are many reports that span a long period of time for this project, and I've done my best to find the most up-to-date facts and information to present to you today. And I want to start by showing you where this piece of property is that we're talking about. So to orient you, we're zooming in from the south, over the top of Sacramento, out onto Highway 65, past the mall. Thunder Valley Casino is in the Sunset Industrial Area site. The 4 pins indicate the corners. And as we look towards the north, we see the city of Lincoln and its rural outskirts and the farmland of the Great Central Valley. As we sweep our view back towards the south, we see occasional small towns surrounded by agriculture, and when we hit Sacramento, we see the sprawl emanating from the city and also emanating from 80. As we move back out on Highway 65, we see the single-family residential sprawl that is being defined in its shape by all of the perennial streams in the area, and then we have our big, mostly vacant Sunset Industrial Area. In the middle of the site, that is a landfill, and we're just going to reorient to be north now. And we can see to the east that there is some commercial area. So at the time of the initial Spanish exploration in the late 1700s, half of the area of the Great Central Valley was vernal pool landscapes. As a result of European occupation of the land, over time we've lost 88% of all of that vernal pool. Right now, we're gonna go and visit the remaining few and observe how it changes through the seasons, since the Sunset Industrial Area still has vernal pools. Let's start with the season that we're in currently, summer. Right now, out in the Sunset Industrial Area, it's hot, it's arid, and it's very bright. Like every summer, there's no trees except for those planted as visual barriers. There's no rain and there's no cloud cover. The grass, which is mostly native, dances in a light breeze from the south and west. There's so much sun that the prairie grows quickly, and the sun also dries it out, so some farmers choose to irrigate. By July, the Swanson hawks, in the lower left corner there, are swooping through the sky, and they're eating grasshoppers and caterpillars. Flocks of listed endangered tricolored blackbirds, top right, are chasing insects in unison, and they're flashing their red shoulder pads that they're so well known for. And of course, the meadowlarks are walking through the grass and they're foraging for seeds. And in this moment, in this summer, these birds are lucky. for birds that rely on grassy habitats are among the fastest declining species in North America. As November comes, the peak growing season is ending. The winds pick up and they shift to the southeast and are blowing in increasingly more cloud cover. As the climate cools and the rains start, the listed endangered tiger salamanders emerge from flooded gopher holes and ground squirrel holes, and the young disperse and the adults breed. The bottom pocket gophers in the lower right are glad to have some time alone in their burrows between the salamanders venturing out and then the burrowing owls moving in. Winter is wet, the temperature is cooler, it's mid-50s during the day, mid-40s at night. The sky's overcast half of the time, and every month is accumulating 4 to 5 inches of rainfall. The Pacific Flyway becomes full of winged traffic as the winged migration enters our region. And early winter, waterfowl arrive and hang out at artificial stock ponds, waiting for the grasslands and the vernal pools to fill in so that they can move in full time. Right now they're foraging in the grasslands during the day, and the burrowing owls are exploring their gopher holes looking for their perfect burrow. As the season progresses, the rich soil becomes saturated with water as a layer of clay below slows the water's descent to the aquifer. Soon, the water will start to puddle on the surface and form vernal pools. In these pools, amphibians will lay their eggs and mate. By mid-December, the vernal pools are beginning to fill, and the waterfowl are settling in the vernal pool grasslands in huge mass. By returning to these vernal pool grasslands year after century, these small and mid-sized white-cheeked goose populations sustain themselves in the winter, during their spring migration, and also during the subsequent nesting season. Spring is the big time for the vernal pools because the microlife and invertebrates, including the listed endangered fairy shrimp and the listed endangered tadpole shrimp, are flourishing in their wet world. Amphibians and insects teem in the vernal pool breeding grounds. Their huge population booms attract the rest of the food chain, the migratory and regional birds, mammals, and reptiles. They're all drawn to the vernal pools for this huge spring feast. And each vernal pool has its own special biodiversity adapted to its specific micro-conditions, making a buffet across the prairie of endless variety with each pool. This will continue for several months. Half of the days are cloudy, it's still rainy and windy from the southeast, and that cool, wet climate is refreshing the pools and keeping the biosphere cool. As the temperatures start to warm in mid-March, the prairie growing season takes off, and the listed endangered California tiger salamanders hatch in the vernal pools. Now, catching a glimpse of a California tiger salamander is also a glimpse into another world, for they're the ideal umbrella species for vernal pool grasslands in our current latitude in the middle half of California. When you see a tiger salamander, it is an indicator of the possible presence of 91 other rare, threatened, or endangered species that are found in the same aquatic and terrestrial habitat of these salamanders, including 48 species that are federally listed. So as the pools begin to shrink and dry up, the race begins for the amphibian life to travel away from the drying pools and find their burrowing places. The solitary bee is juggling between pollen collection and digging their egg tunnels in the dirt before the ground hardens. And in this satellite image, notice the wildflower color starting to come in. These are satellite images of wild during the height of their season in the Sunset Industrial area. We have a lot of rich reds and warm purples, and it's pretty beautiful. So these vernal pools and all of the life that they sustain exist in this location because of how the water interacts with the soil. To the north and the south of the site, we have two perennial creeks, Orchard Creek and Pleasant Creek, and they both regularly overflow their banks. Each of them have multiple intermittent creeks that flow into the SIA from the north and south respectively, as the topography of the site is relatively flat. The perennial creeks are flowing from the east to the west, and they flood more broadly as they progress west. And this pattern of east to west creeks and north and south intermittent creeks extends throughout the greater area, and as a result, Placer County has a lot of vernal pools in their portion of the Great Central Valley. When we look closely at the vernal pool maps of the Sunset Industrial area, we can see that we have high, intermediate, and low concentration of vernal pools in size and density. And we also have various different maps that we can look at to determine the location of the vernal pools. On the left is the Placer County map being used for the Sunset Industrial Area Plan. And on the right, we have Carol Whitham's data from the CVPIA Habitat Restoration Program. Now, it's very important to look closely into the map being used by the county to make sure that we understand how they've chosen to delineate high, intermediate, and low concentrations. Currently, that data has not been available for the individual polygons, whereas we do have that data for Carol's map. And mainly we see that Carol's map is identifying intermediate concentrations of pools over a large area of the site, where the Placer County map is shrinking those areas and providing more refined contours. But again, we don't know how they're establishing the contours, which is slight cause for concern, because when we look at the developable lands that the county has identified in the Sunset Industrial Area, we see that the contour lines of the different vernal pool classifications directly equal the buildable area, seen in gray. And now, in terms of conservation on the site, the PCCP proposed plan does have a portion of the northern part in both existing reserves and reserve acquisition area. When we look closer at this and identify the current reserves and Williamson Act parcels, we see that there are 4 already present at the northern part of the reserve. One of the reserves is a conservation bank, and the other is a mitigation bank, which can mean that it's recreated vernal pools, which is less great than actual original vernal pools. And when we zoom in even more, we can see their specific outlines, and also note that the Orchard Creek Conservation Bank in the upper right is delineated to have trails put through it. And this is something that can happen with the PCCP parcels that they're not just straight habitat protection. There are some uses allowed, like agriculture and cases of recreation. So there is possible for more of these to be slightly compromised by human use. When we compare what we just saw about the existing reserves and then look at the SIA proposed plan, we can see that there is no additional reserve being added. The green space present on the proposed plan map is already existing, and really we could look at the site as without that and then get a much better picture of what the plan is. These are the polygons of Carol Whitham's data map of the intermediate concentration of vernal pools, and as you can see, they could potentially be lost in this development scheme. Now let's transfer to another story present on the site, that of its current conditions, which is all about the interface of prairie and industry. In terms of prairie, the Chico Research Foundation has identified that the vast majority of this site is California annual forb and grass vegetation. That's the light yellow color. It has minimal disturbance and invasives under 5%. This is pretty remarkable. And then the bright yellow color is Mediterranean California naturalized annual and perennial grassland with also minimal disturbance, but a slightly higher concentration of invasives, 20 to 50%. And together, these are covering most of the site. When we look at existing industry, we notice that the dark yellow from the prairie map kind of corresponds to the agriculture blocks in this map, and then that really prime native grassland is primarily given vacant delineation. The purple color is the industrial warehouse land uses, which is primarily along the train tracks and next to Highway 65. We have the Western Regional Sanitary Landfill in the middle, and a lot of parking lots and a commercial area just for the casino. So when we look at how the industry is impacting the site, industry often brings along with it material hazards and pollution. We also have two pipelines, the gas transmission pipeline, that's this purple line, and then a hazardous liquid pipeline that runs along the railroad. We have 11 regulated hazardous material sites present in the Sunset Industrial Area, and all of these have been identified by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. All 11 of these sites are responsible for doing the right thing with their waste disposal, and some of them have been more successful at that than others. What these 11 indicate is that hazardous materials are routinely used, stored, and transported in the Sunset Industrial Area by a whole bunch of different businesses, from commercial and retail, industrial, the landfill, the material recovery facilities, and also the power plants. So let's meet the neighbors. These are our two electricity providers or manufacturers on the site.
Rio Bravo Rockland Biomass
At the top burns wood biomass that would go to the landfill for electricity. And then the Western Regional Sanitary Landfill, which also runs the material recovery facility, is composting a large percentage of the waste and capturing the methane release from that, and working with their partner located right next door to turn that into electricity. And that is, they sell their gas to Energy 2001. The Western Regional Sanitary Landfill, besides for including composting, they also facilitate the disposal of household hazardous waste, recycling, and buyback facilities, and they're recognized as a very cutting-edge landfill in the region. The way that they treat their landfill area is it has this large, bathtub liner underneath where they pile all of the trash, and that is meant to prevent leakage and seepage into the groundwater supply. And that works pretty well, although in the past there have been some indicators of hazardous components present in the groundwater supply directly around the landfill, which make the drinking water not good, but they also have been found in low enough quantities that it isn't a huge problem.
Rio Bravo Rockland Biomass,
on the other hand, has had several violations dealing with how they manage exhaust and waste. Some other neighborhood clubs are the Heavy Transit Group, which are individual businesses located in 3 main areas. The Athens Industrial Area at the top, 24-hour recreational storage in the middle, and then the Ace Hardware Distribution Center at the bottom of the screen. And the Athens Industrial Area has VTS transportation, and they have approximately 50 semi-trucks, where the Ace Hardware Distribution Center has approximately 100 loading docks for semi-trucks. And so they're, of course, taking advantage of their proximity to the highway and really moving quite a lot of product through the site. The repurposed former Pharmacia plant is now a 24-hour recreational vehicle storage, and that includes RVs, cars, and boats. Thunder Valley Casino is the #2 casino in our region. It's owned by the United Auburn Indian Community, and officials say that the hotel is regularly at 97% capacity. This resort is getting 16,000 to 22,000 visitors a day on average, and it employs around 2,600 people. They've newly expanded their facilities, adding another 100 jobs to the payroll, and they have had to do quite a lot of work in order to build this development out here. The vast majority of their site is that bank that we looked at earlier, and they've also have done extensive parking. All of this is parking, all of this is parking, and this is a parking garage. So the casino is really only this much of the site, and the hotel is this mid-rise tower here. They have a food court inside, and they're really the place to go if you want to eat something in the Sunset Industrial Area, as they're the only ones selling any food. They also have their own waste management facility, and that uses hazardous chemicals in order to process the waste properly before releasing it into Orchard Creek. Then there's also a whole plethora of light industrial companies in the site, and they're making everything from fans and crash cushions and being distribution centers for their products. There's a few rental retail places for equipment, and aesthetically there is a very clear method for how to do a light industrial building. There's the old buildings, which are cheap corrugated steel sheds, and then there's the higher value modern light industrial complexes that try to have a little bit more of an office feel in the front and then warehouse in the back. In both cases, there are landscape buffers around these that help divide it from the street and obscure the view, and that's where the trees are coming into the site, because there aren't any natural original trees present anymore. And of course, lots of parking. So when we look at the hazards that come collectively from the site, we have air quality problems, noise problems, and then of course the hazards of having the Union Pacific Railroad run through the site. In terms of air, the Sacramento Valley Air Basin and Placer County have air quality that is worse than the national ambient air quality standards for respirable particulate matter, PM10. And the SIPR has air pollution from vehicles on 65, all of the industrial operations in the Sunset Industrial Area, and the proposed development will likely go over the air pollution levels a day allowed during construction and require air pollution mitigation. Now, in doing that, developers can either do their own mitigation project, or they can pay the district to do it for them. And mitigation fees must go to incentivizing emission reduction projects. In terms of noise, the transit on the Union Pacific Railroad and Highway 65 generate noise levels that exceed the county's noise exposure standard for industrial areas. So when we're talking about adding non-industrial uses, then it means that the sound level is even more above the standard than it should be. And this makes it difficult to add neighborhoods and neighborhood centers and commercial districts into the area because it's just super loud, and that's just the effect of industry. In terms of the railroad, it's still in active use. There's problems with coal dust being blown off railroad carts, and also street level crossings, which are very dangerous for pedestrians. Pollutants from the wood preservation and asbestos are sometimes found in the ballast used as the foundation for the railway. And then of course we have the two transmission lines. And the transmission lines both have their required setbacks, but it means that the railway is really something that needs to be steered clear of for pedestrian activity. As we saw in the video at the beginning, we have suburban sprawl pressing up right against the site to the south. And with that, there's like suburban land uses that are slowly trickling in and taking advantage of the cheap rent in the industrial zoning areas, such as churches and indoor recreational facilities. Families and industry, as a result, are mixing in the parking lots, and this is dangerous because families and large industries use their parking lots differently and have different safety standards. So when designing for these different groups, they have very different spatial requirements and safety requirements, and right now, filling this area with more family-oriented things is dangerous because it's not designed for pedestrians. At the same time, there's a lot of people who are working in this commercial area and at the casino and the landfill, but there's no cafes or places to eat in the Sunset Industrial area besides at gas stations or the Thunder Valley Casino. So people who work in the area either go to the casino for lunch or they need to drive out of the area in order to get lunch. In terms of who's responsible for this site, the county and District 2 Board of Supervisors is really the only one that has direct oversight. The City of Lincoln has a small sphere of influence in the northwest corner of the site, and that includes their Municipal Advisory Council that overlaps with that same little bit of sphere of influence, and then the city limits of Rockland, Roseville, and Lincoln, for the most part, trace the perimeter of the site. So it's really up to Robert Wygant in terms of what happens here, and there isn't very many voices present in the conversation. So, as I said in the beginning, the Sunset Industrial Area has been slated for development for 50 years. Looking back at the 1997 plan, to the west of the railroad, which is, of course, this line here, about half was planned for agriculture and the other half for industry. Between the railroad and Highway 65, it's primarily business park. As a result of being on the books for so long, some districts and boundaries have been established to fit the exact perimeter of the Sunset Industrial Area, where other districts and boundaries would need to be expanded in order to serve the Sunset Industrial Area. So, for example, there's already a fire district specifically for the SIA and a community plan boundary specifically for the SIA. But things like water, utilities, and sewer there's very little infrastructure penetration throughout the site. So that's huge investment in order to develop out of the already industrial zone. When we move forward a couple of years to the 2015 plan, we can see a similar division between industry and agriculture with increasingly more industrial zone. The Placer Ranch's former developer withdrew its application from the city of Roseville in September 2015 and returned the land to the former owner, Eli Broad. In April 2016, Placer County announced that, absent a developer to carry the project forward, Placer County would process the project on its own to continue the forward momentum for the Sunset Industrial Area after all. And with that, they promised that the cost to the county of the permitting process would be reimbursed by the project's eventual developer. In January 2018, the county is still paying for the planning work of Placer Ranch, and that is indicated in this yellow area, and that is the area that is owned by Eli Broad. This is what the county has expended in terms of tax dollars to move the project forward. They've committed $5 million to this upfront planning, where the big developer landowner is not paying for any of it. So, drum roll, let's talk about the proposed development, the third storyline for the site. This is a 2018 plan, and this is the zoning breakdown. And notice how the different zoning boundaries relate specifically to the landowner parcels. Each major landowner is designated their specific zoning amendment for what they would like to do with the land. Starting with the reserve at the top, we already know that that exists. The sphere of influence of Lincoln is designated Urban Reserve District for a future Lincoln development. We have the landfill and the land that the landfill owns, all designated eco-industrial manufacturing, which doesn't really change anything. The casino and the land owned by the Auburn Indian community, United Auburn Indian Community, excuse me, is all rated for entertainment and mixed use. And then the Innovation District to the west is owned by Angelo Toscopoulos, another very prominent developer, and that's slated for innovation. Placer Athens Limited owns this parcel, and that's also slated for innovation. Placer Ranch, which is owned by Eli Broad and via Placer Ranch Limited, is its own special district for residential, university, commercial, etc. And then all of the existing industrial area, that just stays industrial. So all the small landowners don't get any special zoning privileges. Now, Angelo Toscopoulos and Eli Broad are very large developers, and for those of you that don't know, I would just like to share a little bit of information about them since they're such key players. Mr. Toscopoulos is a major developer based in Sacramento. He's been fined by the United States Environmental Protection Agency for a violation of the Clean Water Act regarding another one of his rural conversion developments. He fought the fine all the way to the Supreme Court, but he did lose the case. And that same year, he donated to his alma mater, Sac State, a massive Hellenistic collection of 70,000 pieces. Eli Broad is one of the nation's biggest home builders with his company KS Homes. He's now retired, but still active at 85 with a net worth of $7.3 billion. He has several charitable foundations, which have $3 billion in assets, and he supports medical research, charter schools, and civic projects in Los Angeles. His trusted employee for life Holly Tisch, also a Sac State alumni, is the president of Placer Ranch Limited. So let's zoom in and look at the Placer Ranch plan. It has a proposed town center. This is a university campus. We have Campus Park, which is industrial, that dark purple at the top, and then the rest is neighborhood. The proposed town center is meant to be the urban core, anchoring the other districts. It's a place to shop, dine, obtain services, and socialize. It's modeled on a traditional urban town setting, emphasizing pedestrians, but not compromising car access. It's a mix of retail, office spaces, apartment, loft-style homes, and it could eventually grow into a live-work-play location. 600,000 square feet of commercial office and 2,142 residential units are all proposed for this orange area. Now, the proposed university is called the California State University Sacramento Placer Campus. And Sac State and Sierra College would both have a presence on this campus. There'd be academic buildings, student union, campus-focused commercial areas, rec buildings, student faculty housing, athletic fields across the whole top of the site, stadium, library, performing arts, everything that you expect in a large university. They'd start off with 1,500 to 3,500 students, and it could grow to as large as 30,000 students with 4,500 faculty and staff. Now, the proposed campus park is put in direct relation to the town center and university campus to offer industry, university engagement. And it's going to be low and mid-rise buildings that can be used in a large-scale employment center kind of scenario. So it's parceled for big single lot users or for a large corporate campus. And then the rest of the site, of course, is all residential. So we can see the residential more clearly in the land use map. And don't be fooled by the blue color, it's not lakes, it means schools. The roads you see are very big. The narrowest are those in the residential area, and they're 40 feet wide. And the largest is the 6-lane parkway arteries that come off of the Placer Parkway. So that's like this road and this road here. So notice how the campus here, which is supposed to be connected to the whole surrounding area because students walk, is bisected or is separated from those areas by these massive, massive roads. Now, to break down the different neighborhoods, the University Creek neighborhood in the northwest of the site, which is like primarily between these roads here, is low-density residential villages and detached small lot single-family homes. There's 2 high-density residential lots, as you can see in the dark brown color on the map. And there's 2 schools and 2 parks with playing fields, ball courts, etc. The green part in the map is the flood zone from the creeks, and that becomes the communal green space. To the southeast, we have the proposed Campus Arcade neighborhood. That is this area here. And it's residential villages with this small central park. It's primarily single-family homes and small lot housing types, and it's intended to mimic the character of the neighborhood to the south. Then in this corner, this southwest corner, we have a proposed active adult neighborhood. So there would be an age restriction for the community of 720 dwelling units. all single-family housing with extensive fencing. The fencing was really emphasized and the community centers around a private recreation center on 4 acres in the middle with indoor-outdoor rec amenities. So the whole point is that if you live in that community, it's just people in that community, and you don't have the chance to negatively impact the prairie around. So the medium-high concentration vernal pool area in Placer Ranch, down over here, and also in the site but not delineated on this map, are all designated as recreation corridors, which can be a bad thing depending on how the recreation is incorporated into it. So this is the collective character of these residential developments. This is the neighborhood to the south, and you can see that sharp line at the upper part of the image, which is the boundary of the SIA. So just imagine like propagating this up through the top of the frame. And when we zoom into the details of the Placer Ranch proposed plan, there is 10% affordable housing included, which is the minimum legally required. But this does not fit the existing demographics of Placer County, where 60% of us qualify for affordable housing. And also, the developer can buy out of affordable housing at a rate of $4,000 a unit. So the housing is really oriented towards primary wage earners, and it's meant to attract higher wage earner populations to move from the Bay Area to the Sunset Industrial Area to work in the commercial areas up here. It's not intended for people within Placer County to move into the Sunset Industrial Area. The Placer Ranch plan does reference the Sacramento Area Council of Governments' general suggestions for a town center, although the county has not engaged SACOG to contribute to the project. And while the plan encourages and promotes good environmental and social practices, such as permeable paving and safe routes to school for kids, it has no backbone in order to require that. So many of the environmental and social good things are not just merely suggestions, but they're also Band-Aid sized. There's not systematic planning for the community as a whole to be more sustainable environmentally or socially. And so these are some sketches on the left of the sort of downtown, town center area in the plan. And then we can see here what low, medium, and high density means on the map. And it's still very much sprawl housing style. This is not high density or medium density when you're looking at a more urban area at all. Another project component of the SIA is the Placer Parkway. It's a 6-lane publicly funded expressway that begins at Highway 65, connected to our site, and it goes all the way over to 99 for airport access. It bisects the Placer County Conservation Plan, and it requires a major interchange and extensive rebuilding on Highway 65 to make it work, indicated by the white zone along Highway 65. So, looking at the map, the interchange will be above grade from Highway 65 over the Union Pacific Railway tracks, and the first exit will be at Foothill Boulevard, right here. At that point, it will be at grade, and most likely the second intersection in the site will also be at grade, and it will continue at grade. After the second intersection, the parkway does widen up and become like an expressway through the grasslands. So as of 2015, Placer County is one of the largest counties in the state with no local transportation funding, and 32% of the Placer Parkway will be funded by the state, where the 68% will be funded by regional fees, developer impact fees, and transit fares such as tolls. So all of the traffic impact mitigation that developers are required to do for this site is likely to go to buying the Placer Parkway instead of encouraging more sustainable modes of transportation such as buses and light rail or anything that we'd consider like communal transit. So by 2020, the first little stretch of Placer Parkway is scheduled to be finished. And that exit, as well as the exit on the second intersection, are really primely located for the industrial zoned areas. So the Athens Corp is getting great highway access for their parcel. The landfill is, of course, getting great access to the parkway, and then also Angela Toskopoulos is getting great access. On the south side, Placer Parkway is being bisected by these two arteries and exits, and that's partially how the site is being divided up when we looked at the zoning plan. Zooming into those blue squares, this is what it actually means. The innovation districts, the light industrial manufacturing facilities are going to increase in density as the site builds out over the decades. But to start off, the general commercial entertainment mixed use is going to start with a floor area ratio of 15% and eventually build up to a floor area ratio of 100%, and that is still very low density because that just means that you get like one story across the whole site or the equivalent. And the business park innovation center area is going to start off with a 0.2 floor area ratio that looks like this and grow into this kind of layout and building size. The traditional industrial zone is going to go from this kind of floor area ratio 0.2 to 0.6 as seen here. So these, by looking at these floor area ratio diagrams, you can get a sense of the kind of size and possible shape of the industrial buildings. When we look at the specific details proposed as development standards, on this part of the slide, we see two primary features. We have our industrial building in the middle of the site, surrounded by a lot of asphalt and parking, and then a little landscape skirt. And that obscures the view of the building like we talked about before and continues the kind of industrial build-out approach that's currently present. But this approach is very traditional, and especially to the amount of parking that it's allocating, and it will have to be reconciled with ride sharing, self-driving cars, and other disruptive technologies that predict private car ownership to decline by as much as 80% in the next 10 years. So it's very likely that we will not need so many parking spots for employees to drive to work and park at work, yet we're allocating quite a lot of land just for parking. Another component of the puzzle is the Lincoln General Plan. Now, as you recall, the Lincoln has influence in the northwest corner of the site, and they have that designated in their plan as a special use district and as public facilities. So it will eventually be built out, and then the top part of their little square is already a reservation, is a conservation zone. It's also quite interesting to look beyond the yellow delineation line of the SIA to see how Lincoln is planning on expanding its villages and public facilities and special use district all the way right up to the SIA. So our piece of the PCCP in here is going to be backfilled as much as possible by development eventually. Okay. Now, the landfill. In the county, residential land use is not permitted within 1 mile of an active landfill, and buffers of 1,500 feet are required for commercial and recreational land uses. These restrictions are established in the general plan policy 4G11, and we can see in the SIA 2015 plan what that 1 mile buffer looks like in terms of the whole site. Basically means that none of this parcel to the south can be residential. But when we look at the 2018 plan, the buffers have been extensively reduced. And the residential buffer then becomes 2,000 feet for residential, 1,000 for commercial, and 500 for recreation. There are asterisks attached to these, as exceptions can be made for residences to be as close as 1,000 feet, and commercial and recreation uses as close as 300 feet if the health hazards are disclosed to the occupants. Now, in 2014 and 2015, the landfill received approximately 250 complaints from September to February regarding odor. Approximately 90% of these complaints were received in January and February alone, and were concentrated in the Crocker Ranch, West Park, and Whitney Ranch residential areas, located to the south and southeast of the site. So that's way beyond the 1 mile buffer, and the odor is still intense enough for people to call and complain. So what we have here is the reduction of the landfill buffer to allow for development, but it brings into question how pleasant it will be to be in the development if there are these odor problems, and who's going to want to live in a fancy, expensive house that close to the landfill. This is the collage of all of these projects put together. This is the only place currently where you can see the collective site plan. And we know from SACOG's blueprint updates that detached single-family homes are being built out very quickly, and other types of development are not keeping pace. This plan for the Sunset Industrial Area and Placer Ranch is proposed to be implemented based on market demand, which would lead one to conclude that the detached single-family homes would be built first, and the rest, including the anchor, the town center, would not be built until much, much later. Now that you have a collective view of the Sunset Industrial Area and the environmental, land use, and proposed development stories that weave together, I hope that in your individual fields of expertise, you'll be able to make wise extrapolations that relate to the site as a whole and contribute to diversifying the conversation about how this development can be better for Placer County's residents, Placer County's environments, and be on the forefront of change in a positive way for our region as a whole. Thank you very much for listening.